thank you all for joining us for the last session of the day. We'll try and keep it light and engaging. I'm excited about the panel, not just because we can sit here and commiserate about all our challenges as fellow CSOs, but really to try and be optimistic and look forward and share ideas and see how we can potentially develop some cross-sectional collaboration. We have a very experienced panel steeped in leading change and implementing sustainability initiatives, and I'm excited to be a part of it and to talk to them all. There's significant expertise across the panel in climate action planning, in metrics and sustainability reporting, measuring and tracking progress. Systems thinking, I think, is just a natural characteristic of a CSO, trying to pick apart where the appropriate points in a system are to intervene and what leverage you can play. And then Brian and I were talking earlier that it's sort of a jack of all trades position, I think, where we're required to jump in and see different angles and roll up our sleeves in areas we may not have individual expertise in, but that's just the nature of the CSO sustainability role. And so hopefully we can talk about some of that as we go forward. So we'll do brief introductions. Immediately on my left is Brian Swait of the Arup Group, and he's the leader of the Cities Initiative for Americas. And Brian, prior to joining Arup, was the former chief of energy and environment and open space for the city of Boston. So very detailed understanding of cities and sustainability. Next is Liz Croson, who's the deputy chief sustainability officer for the city of LA. And her background is a lot in water and policy. She came from the former executive director of LA Waterkeeper and worked on water policy under Mayor Garcetti. And then next is Nancy Sutley, who is the Chief Sustainability and Economic Development Officer for LADWP. And she's sort of maybe the archetypical CSO. I mean, she's held CSO roles in LA and Sacramento and DC, all over the place. So maybe all of us will be asking her questions by the end of the panel. But obviously, she was the former chair of the White House Council on Environmental Quality prior to coming back to LA. And then last but certainly not least is Dean Kubani, who's the Chief Sustainability Officer and Assistant Director of Public Works at the City of Santa Monica. And Dean has served on many nonprofit panels and advisory boards at the local, state, and national level. And he's namely the International Sustainability Indicators Network. So he has a lot of experience with metrics and measuring the progress of sustainability. So I'll start off with Liz to sort of set the stage and tell us a little bit about Plan LA, the city's sustainability plan, and set the stage for that and where we're headed. And I would also like to ask each of them as they make their opening remarks to sort of mention a challenge or opportunity that they find exciting or particularly, engaging that they're working on at the moment. So Liz, will you start us off?
Great, yeah. Good afternoon. Pleasure to be here. Thank you for the introduction. So I am the Deputy Chief Sustainability Officer. Our Chief Sustainability Officer, Lauren Faber-O'Connor, is out on maternity leave right now, so it's an honor to be here in her place. So I want to talk about the plan, lowercase p, capital L-A, lowercase n, so really emphasizing the L-A in our plan. This plan was released by Mayor Garcetti in 2015. It is a comprehensive roadmap to get the city of LA to sustainability. It is, very city specific, and if you're not aware, the county of LA is actually going through their own process right now to develop a countywide sustainability plan. So we are working with them very closely on coordinating that effort. But our city plan is divided into 3 sections. It hits environment, economy, and equity. In the environment section, it hits on topics like water and climate and equity, environmental justice, and urban ecosystems. And in the economy, we talk about housing and jobs. So it really is an attempt to have a document that's cross-cutting across multiple disciplines throughout the city. And as you look through it, even though it is divided into these 13 issue chapters, there is integration and cross-pollination across the entire document. So if you're looking in the water section, you're looking at green infrastructure or stormwater capture, you can definitely find that in parks and urban ecosystems, or in the environmental justice chapter. If you look at trees and biodiversity, it's definitely something that you'll find in the resilience chapter because it relates to heat as well as public health in the environmental justice chapter. So there really is an attempt to have a comprehensive roadmap that is measurable. So one of the key requirements of the mayor for the plan was to make sure that whatever's in this plan was actually something that we could measure so that we could track our progress and be accountable. So each chapter itself has both, short-term and long-term goals. We have 2017 goals, which we're working right now on our third annual report that will track all of our progress on those 2017 goals. And even back in 2016, we reported that we were 90% on track to meet all those 2017 goals. We also have 2025 and 2035 goals, so we are really looking for the long term of what we want to see happen in Los Angeles when it comes to sustainability. And as far as what I'm super excited about right now is the other thing that the mayor said when he approved this plan was that we would update it every 4 years. So we are actually engaged in initiating the update of the Sustainable City Plan that will be released in early 2019. And this time we're really doing it in the context of the mayor's commitment to be compatible with the Paris Climate Agreement. So we're really looking at it from a reduction in GHG lens as well as a climate adaptation lens. While we recognize that not everything in the plan is going to have a direct impact on reducing our greenhouse gas emissions, so we will still include the comprehensive nature of the plan, but we will actually have a target when it comes to being compliant with Paris, which I think is a really exciting and bold step for the city of LA to make.
Excellent. Thank you, Liz. Next, I guess we'll turn to Brian since I skipped him, and so you can tell us about what you're working on and what excites you.
I'm happy to be skipped. So thank you, John, and thank you for coming to the session at the end of the day. We are so Arup, very quickly, the 60-second. We're a global engineering, design, planning, and consulting firm headquartered in London, 92 offices in 40 countries around the world, 15,000 strong. Here in the U.S., we're in a dozen offices, 1,200 folks, including a little north of 200 in Playa Vista. So happy to be here. We focus on the big, horny, the big, hairy, challenging.
I told you we'd keep it light.
I was trying to get ornery and hairy, and I've never combined. So the big, ornery and hairy issues around sustainability, and yeah, I've had slip-ups before. That's the first time. Only in the City of Lights. So we think long-term, and we want to think about where the challenges are coming from. And I think today's lunchtime lecture was really interesting in framing how bad we are at predicting things more than 10 years out. Now, we spend time at Arup trying to think about drivers of change, and I encourage folks to go to driversofchange.com. We have a wholly owned think tank called Foresight Research and Innovation, where we've developed cards on 100 drivers of change facing cities going forward, and we update it on almost a semi-annual basis because the world where sustainability is operating is changing so rapidly, and the goals are changing. And at Arup, we've had the privilege to work with many of the leading network organizations like C40 for the last 6 or 7 years, 100RC, the World Energy Council, the work that Liz mentioned around Deadline 2020, so setting Paris-compliant city targets and what that means. We actually released about a year ago in Mexico City, Deadline 2020 with pathways for all now 90 plus or minus C40 cities around the world. They need to update the 40, but the C90. But it is, in this day and age, cities are making Paris compliance commitments and saying, what does it mean to us? And we have the privilege of working with C40 in defining that and in coming up with the framework and audit profile for cities that have made that big, bold commitment. Because, as anyone who's been at this conference before knows, it's rubber hits the road time now. And we need performance, and we need metrics, and we need to deliver on those actions. We also work a lot directly with cities. We've had the privilege of working with DC, San Francisco, Toronto, Boston on their sustainability plans and their climate action plans. And I think when we get into the questions, it's been interesting seeing how cities have tackled this. LA tackled it broadly around environment, economy, and equity. There are certain cities that are still focused narrowly just based on where they're organized around climate mitigation and adaptation. And so, there isn't a right or wrong place to start. But what matters is that we have definable performance metrics that we're delivering against and organizing to do so, and then being accountable to that. And as John mentioned, my previous life in the city of Boston was as effectively the chief sustainability officer, and adopting their climate action plan going forward. And I think one of the things that I found was the strength in cities talking to each other. And we're now in a place where the networks of cities, be it Urban Sustainability Directors Network, Climate Mayors, C40, now Carbon Neutral City Alliance, which is sort of the leaders of the most aggressive cities that have carbon neutrality plans by 2040 or earlier at this point, are talking to each other. We are quasi-competitive. We're competitive collaborative. But we know that we don't have the time to mess this up. Between now and 2020 and now and 2030, and we need to bend the curve significantly and don't have time to pilot and fail significantly. We need to get on the right direction going forward quickly. So with that, I will...
Excellent. Thank you, Brian.
So you
Nancy?
should have skipped me a time.
Yeah, exactly. After your comment. Nancy, please.
Oh, well, thanks. And I feel now obligated to act like an archetype. I don't know what that means, but well, I guess let me just I'll start a little bit with kind of how we intersect with the plan, and then I thought I would talk about sort of just, since I am the archetype, some of my observations which I think means I'm old, done this for a long time. So anyway, Department of Water and Power is, if you had to find the, what was the biggest dinosaur, the brontosaurus or whatever, of sustainability, of the impacts on sustainability in Los Angeles, we are by far, both of the city as sort of a corporate entity and the city as a whole. So we take up a lot of that plan. We are leads in, I think, about half of the initiatives that are specifically identified in the plan, and implicated in probably 3/4 of them one way or the other. So and I think taking it very seriously, and this is across all of DWP and its operations. And this is also as a result of many years of sort of policy making about the city level, the state level, and certainly to some extent to the national level. And I think dealing with a new normal. Years ago, LA, in the face of a severe drought, really wondered whether it could continue to grow, and the city, undertook to try to really look at some, do some forward thinking, and we all today are reaping the benefits of that forward thinking, 25 years ago, of putting conservation first, of redesigning our rates to promote conservation. Of thinking about kind of long-term planning that is now sort of enshrined in state law and certainly captured in the plan. And so, we know what we need to do, and it's really literally all laid out in there, whether it's meeting the water conservation goals that are set out in the plan, the goals for local water, so getting 50% of our water locally, reducing our dependence on imported water by 50%. Those are all really important things, and now there's a way to sort of hold everybody in the city accountable for that. And the same thing on the power side, where really literally everything about the way that DWP operates is changing. So 15, 20 years ago, we were certainly a coal-dependent utility, and by 2025 we'll be out of coal entirely. And in the meantime, the goals that were set, I think really drive innovation, they drive technological innovation, and innovation in thinking about how you achieve these goals, and in many cases we've been able to exceed these goals. So, for example, we're trying to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions because of AB 32, because of the goals in the plan, and the statewide goal is now to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, the state of California, by 40% by the year 2030. At the end of 2016, LADWP had reduced its carbon emissions by 42% from 1990 levels. So we well now exceeded the, sort of whatever our pro rata share of the state's goal. And then I asked the question, my staff, I said, well, what does that mean for urban air pollution? Because we talk a lot about how there are these co-benefits of reducing our greenhouse gas emissions. We've reduced our NOx emissions, a primary cause of smog in Los Angeles. LADWP has reduced, in that same period of time, its NOx emissions from its in-basin operations by 91% since 1990. So give us a goal, give us some time, and we can knock it out of the park. And I think that's what's, it's incredibly important to have that. And I think what you've really seen is sort of a shift in attitude, and it's not just LADWP, but I think about the environment and about sustainability generally from a make me do it, threaten me, or take me to court, or fine me and I'll fight you to the end of time, to one where they're really able to make the business case that because we recognize that we're living in a world of scarcer and scarcer resources in a changing climate, that the kinds of initiatives that are outlined in this plan, whether it's local water or local solar or investing in EV electric vehicle infrastructure, all of which are laid out, there is a business case for LADWP. And then the other sort of thing that I've noticed over the years is in the early, I'm going to date myself now. So in the early 90s, I worked at the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency, and at that point, when you talked about the environment and the federal government, everybody said, well, that's EPA's job. When I went back to D.C. in 2009, right? Anyway, when I went back to D.C. in 2009, what I discovered, which was a very nice thing, and of course I think you see this at the state and local level, is that it wasn't just EPA who thought that taking care of the environment was their job. And apparently they forgot that most recently. But really across the federal government, so whether it's our friends from the Navy who would really thinking about how energy impacted the Marines who are fighting in Afghanistan, or the Department of Transportation, worried about roads being underwater in Florida, you really start to see a shift in the way that large organizations like the federal government, like state and local government, think about sustainability as their responsibility, and that there is really a business case for doing that. So I think I'm going to shut up now, other than to say when you asked about what I'm excited about, I think there's two things. And one is, I think, and you heard a little bit at lunch, one way to think about sustainability is trying to electrify everything, because electricity is getting cheaper and cleaner, and it's efficient as a way, I'm not an engineer, but it's efficient as a way to move things, or things that need to move to be powered. And so that really holds incredible promise, whether it's in sort of smart cities and how do you integrate data and systems and topics you were mentioning earlier. And then of course, sitting on the other side of downtown is the La Kretz Innovation Campus, and the Clean Tech Open that was happening this afternoon, organized by the Los Angeles Clean Tech Incubator. That was something that the city of Los Angeles started and spun off. And that beautiful campus is a building that is owned by LAD to BP, and every dime of that was raised by the city of Los Angeles. And so for those people who say, government can't get anything done, please go over to 525 South Hewitt Street and take a look at what government did.
Thank you, Nancy. Dean?
Hi, everyone. So Santa Monica has a kind of a long history in sustainability. We've been very fortunate to have a very progressive population and a very progressive city council. So back in the early 90s, we started developing one of the first sustainability plans in the country, and that was at a time when sustainability was about recycling. At that time, we had some forethought. Nobody knew really how to put together a plan. So we looked at what other cities were doing and decided that they were doing it wrong, and so we came up with our own plan. It was a very, at the time, comprehensive plan that looked not just at environmental sustainability, but also looked at economic development and social equity. And we decided that we didn't want to make it just a plan that sat on a shelf, but it actually had to help us guide our policy and our decisions and actually accomplish something. So we incorporated very aggressive goals, and we adopted a number of indicators that we were tracking regularly and set targets for those indicators, and we required ourselves to report to our community on that regularly. And that model really helped us move the ball forward a lot. We've revised the plan several times. We're at a stage right now where we're trying to, you may have heard that we, 5 years ago, got a grant from Bloomberg to develop a well-being index, and which we have done, and now we're trying to integrate that well-being index into our sustainability plan so that we can more kind of tightly bind these economic and equity issues to the environmental issues. Because even though I think everybody talks about this three-legged sustainability stool, the three legs are still really pretty far apart, and nobody, I don't think, has figured out how to weave them together. And I think with our well-being work, we're getting a little bit closer at doing that. But I would like to say that I think our biggest success in Santa Monica is the Plan LA, because a little tiny city of 90,000 people on the coastline doing sustainability is one thing, but getting your big brother next door to do something similar is a much better thing. And I think what Santa Monica has been very fortunate to do is develop something that has been a very successful model that was used by cities like Los Angeles, that's used by the STAR Community Index is based on Santa Monica's Sustainable City Plan. They're all very similar now. They're talking about this three-legged sustainability stool. They have a lot of metrics and goals. They're very performance-based. So I think we can be proud that we've helped to get this whole sustainability, municipal sustainability industry kind of off the ground and moving in the right direction. And now we see things like Urban Sustainability Directors Network. There's so much competition amongst cities now to one-up each other. So that's a great thing to see, because that's really helping to provide the urgency that we really need to have with sustainability. As far as kind of current challenges and opportunities, and now I'm going to talk a little bit more about the environmental side of sustainability. In Santa Monica, we have kind of three big things that we're trying to achieve: water self-sufficiency by 2020, zero waste by 2030, and carbon neutrality by 2050. And every single one of those is a really heavy lift. They're huge challenges. We have to achieve them. And I don't think we can wait till 2050 to get to carbon neutrality. So that's where we really need to use the resources that we're seeing in all these other cities and collaborate so that we can definitely get there. And then I guess the other big challenge is we're building the largest municipal living building challenge certified building right behind City Hall right now, and that's been a surprisingly big challenge in really changing the mindset of how things are permitted and approved, so that we can actually have buildings that are truly sustainable and not just a little less bad than they used to be. But I'm happy to say we have our permits, we're charging forward. Come down to Santa Monica City Hall and take a look at our building.
That's perfect, Dee. I'm glad we practiced this panel for hours and hours beforehand, because your comments were on the tip of my tongue about finding a way that each of these individual plans or each of these components that we're all working on, whether it's universities or cities or utilities and so forth, can come together. And I think a lot of the challenges, opportunities, the issues we face is potentially by scaling these problems, right? If you get the problem and grow it bigger, potentially you can find these solutions, right? And the idea that we can, if we're each individually measuring stuff in our own little domains, are we missing things by not sharing or collaborating or measuring things holistically? So there were several comments along the way about this concept of collaboration across sectors and sharing these plans and sort of maybe getting out of our silos a bit. I'm interested from all of your perspectives how you see that playing out, and what you think the benefits are of sharing those metrics or sort of expanding that scope a bit. And to throw a little twist on it, are we missing stuff with the focus on metrics and measurement that we can't necessarily measure, but are very much important to a holistic approach to these challenges? And then I'll open the floor for anyone who wants to jump in, or I can call on you. Yeah.
I'd have to say that when I started working in sustainability back in the early 90s, I would speak at a conference and most of the people in the audience would have really long beards and be wearing tie-dyed shirts. And now it's a completely different audience. So I would definitely say this collaboration. We have a group in California called Clean Cities or Green Cities California, where a number of cities throughout the state work together. We meet twice a year. All of our staff get together and work on building electrification, EV action plans, and I think that's really helping to accelerate what we've been able to do. We wrote into our sustainability plan and the guidelines that we can't become a sustainable island in Santa Monica because the issues we're dealing with are global. So even if we solve the problem and nobody else is going along with us, we're going to go over the waterfall just like everybody else. So my job has been throughout the years, part of my job has been going out and talking to other cities and sharing what it is that we do with these other cities. To get to your question about numbers and tracking, and is that kind of digressing a little bit, I've actually found that the numbers and tracking and setting the goals have been positive, because a lot of times in other cities, particularly cities in the Midwest or in other places that aren't traditionally focused on sustainability, you get a mayor in one of those cities that is very competitive, and they see another city that's doing something, and then they say, we want to be better than those guys. And so that has really helped to ramp up. I mean, it's been a real positive competition, and I think it's kind of changed the face of municipal sustainability in the last decade.
I think if I worry a little bit about the sort of so focused. I mean, the metrics I think are really important. I think the indicators are important. I think the goals are incredibly important. But it has to speak to people, day to day. And I think that, you have to, what I think, something that we've been working on at DWP since I've been there is really trying to involve the employees, right? So the people who are making decisions every day at DWP about, what cars to buy, and when to turn on the lights in their facility, and what kind of landscaping there is. I mean, I just worry that the numbers sometimes get a little bit removed from people who can really make a difference day to day in the operations, and then I think that also translates to, feeling part of those greater goals, and so I think that's you sort of don't want to lose the people part of sustainability. And how important it is, and we see that, particularly in our younger employees. We have a green team, an internal green team, and they're young and they're enthusiastic and they care about this stuff, and they really want to make a difference, and they want their workplace to reflect their values, and that's a really great thing. And so I think that we have to be sure not to lose the people part of this, and so we've done sustainability workshops. Maria Sisson Wade, Maria, has really done an amazing job of bringing together various parts of this kind of sprawling department to think about sustainability day in and day out. And really that engaging of people who can make a difference beyond just counting the beans is, I think, incredibly important.
Yeah, I would definitely second that. I think one of the areas where I think it's maybe more difficult to find metrics is when we're thinking about equity and how do we integrate equity into our sustainable objectives. And we have found some creative ways to measure that, whether that's that every Angelino should be within 10-minute walk of a park, or we should be able to improve our score in the CalEnviro screen, a statewide measurement tool for disadvantaged communities. So we try to find ways to be able to measure our progress, but I think ultimately we're talking about improving quality of life, and that can be really difficult to put a number to. So I think for us, we are certainly driven by the accountability and the measurement, but in the plan, and I know plans across the country, I think it's important to include some clear initiatives and strategies that are more about the impact that they're having on our neighborhoods and people, like Nancy says. So I do think that we could miss some really important things if we're too focused on just numbers. And then I just want to say, on the question of scale, is that, and not to minimize the damage that's been done at the federal level in the last year, but there has been a beneficial outcome of that, and that's that cities across the world, but really in the U.S. in particular, have really stepped up to collaborate to make real commitments. And cities are on the front line of the impacts of climate change, dealing with them on a daily basis, and they're also the ones that can make the decisions that will have real impacts. I mean, we're really fortunate, I think, in LA to have a municipally owned utility that both produces and distributes water and power, so that we actually have a lot of control over how we're going to meet our climate outcomes, and that's a really good place to be. But to see, the Mayor Garcetti was one of the founders of Climate Mayors, which was formed several years ago, but really has accelerated since Trump withdrew from the Paris Climate Agreement, or started that process. And now, we were at 60 mayors, now we're at 391 mayors across the US have said, hey, we're in on climate change, we're gonna make a difference, and that's in 45 states. So there's only 5 states left that don't have any mayors in those states that haven't stepped up to commit to climate. And so I think that, there is that healthy competition, but there's also an incredible amount of collaboration and information sharing that's happening because of it.
Yeah, I'd agree with all those. I'd just add a couple. Equity, critically important. Climate change, you mentioned. I think there is a cap. If we design measures around climate change, there's a cap amongst the general public, not just the folks who work in agencies, but amongst the general public, for folks that will ever be a primary driver in their decision making. So we need to make sure that as we are measuring things, we are measuring and communicating in ways that motivate the behavior change that we want, based on people's nearer term interests and how they make their decisions. So sometimes we get too caught up in metrics and measures that don't connect with everyday life. I would add resilience. That to me is a big concern. We have a harder time measuring what resilience looks like, but if we don't address issues of sustainability and climate change with a primary lens around resilience, then we're missing the point. We're not doing it in a way that is going to be sustainable temporally, and may wind up having to address the same issues down the pipeline. And we tend to measure what's easy, and that doesn't mean, as Liz was saying, that the issues that we can't measure are less important. So we need to make sure that just because it can be measurable doesn't mean it is getting a higher priority than the issues that aren't measurable. And it's things like equity and resilience. It's also things like fun, right? This can't be we're giving things up, and so how are we creating sense of a place and enjoyment to address this? The final point I'd make is, within the scale and scope issues, one of the areas where I do see real big benefit in these networks and working together is that it gets us outside of thinking about solving these issues largely from an incremental standpoint, because when we're looking at ourselves and just talking amongst ourselves, we're starting from where we're at today. When we are in these networks and seeing what Oslo is doing and seeing what Sydney's doing and seeing what Paris is doing, it allows us to have the faith in transformational change. Because I'm not sure if we even have the right government structures, the right networks, the right infrastructure, ownership systems to be able to get to where we need to go by 2050. But we need to see models out there, and we are only going to see the models and kick the tires and understand them if you get out there and do those networks. It is a lot easier to convince a mayor to take a bold direction if someone else around the world has already done it, or an agency head, versus if you're saying, well, I got this theory, but well, let's take this bold action.
Yeah, those are all fantastic points, and it's unfortunate that we have such a short amount of time because there are so many avenues to walk down and discuss in detail. But I think, my last question, I would like to open it up for your questions, but my last question I'd like you all to opine upon is the concept that essentially what we're trying to do is create positive sum solutions. We're trying to create multi-benefit outcomes, and we also live in the resource-constrained world where we're having to allocate resources and sort of do business in the current concept. How do you guys go about seeking those positive sum solutions, seeking out those multiple stakeholder wins, and allocating resources when it may be easiest to allocate resources to a metric that's visible or a metric that pops on the cover of the plan, right? But maybe the more meaningful metric, or the metric that actually matters most and has the biggest impact, is something that maybe is a little more hidden. So if you guys can touch on that, and the theme of the conference, at least one of the themes I've heard consistently, is partnerships. We've touched on that a little bit, but we haven't really talked about public-private partnerships or other opportunities there. Is that something that you guys are actively engaged with?
So I'll buy time for the other panelists. I do think, as the private sector person up on the panel in my current hat, I think there's a growing appreciation that everybody has a stake in the game, right? And that I worked in private sector real estate development for a while, and the COO at the time said, I don't need to deal with the resiliency issues. That's the city's job. The government should think about protecting the city, and I don't need to take proactive steps. They need to tell us what to do. And then you get to government and you realize, you don't have the leverage or power or resources to be able to address problems on this magnitude without significant private sector involvement, and they need to be a part of the solution. So I think we in this country are at the tip of the iceberg of really developing effective large-scale public-private partnerships that temporally look out 15, 20 years and say, we are concerned about the conditions that we're all going to be facing in 2030 and 2040. How do we start gathering the resources, the momentum together to partner on this and be far less adversarial about defining the exact when, because it's not an if anymore, it's a when, and if we're off by a couple of years, that's okay, but we still need to be ready for this. So I've been heartened by both the NGO community, the academic community, and now significant long-term private sector owners, be they companies like your Amazons or like your GEs, or your retail companies or your real estate development owners that are saying we want to be part of the solution. It makes good business sense, but it's also because we all live, work, and play in those communities, and we need to be able to preserve that quality of life.
Yeah, well, a couple things. I guess on the sort of private-public partnership side of things, one place where I think the city of LA is really moving forward on a partnership is when it comes to electrification. We have, in the city, we've deployed, I'm trying to think, I think it's 400 EVs in our municipal fleet now in the city of LA, 200 of which are LAPD. But one of the places that we're really looking to expand is in the, mid and large rig vehicles. And that's not really a place where there's a where there's a lot in the market. And so, our office and the mayor's office worked with several other cities to put out an RFI, an EV RFI, to ask the manufacturers, hey, we're willing to buy, this many, over 100,000 trucks. What can you produce? What can you provide? So really putting it out there, like we're making a commitment to make a change and to try to drive the market ourselves with our own business if we, work together and collaborate, and what can you provide? So we're kind of in that process of figuring that out. So I think, that's one example where, cities in the private sector, manufacturing sector can kind of work together and push some levers. And then, I would also say, just sort of like within the city itself, the city of LA is so big, over 30 departments, that we require partnerships to get things done with ourselves. And so, and really, when you think about, what is the most cost-effective, multi-benefit way to do something, that means you're going to have to bring a bunch of different departments to the table. So we've got departments that have mandates to repair this many streets. We've got a department that has to comply with stormwater standards. We've got a department that's trying to look for new sources of water supply. So when you tear up a street and you put stormwater capture over a groundwater basin, you can hit 3 of those goals, and you will increase the cost of that project by 5 to 10%. Whereas if you did each individually, the cost would be so much greater. So, our office is trying to work really closely with the departments to figure out where those opportunities are.
I just think we take a very narrow view of what a public-private partnership is. I mean, every day we engage in public-private partnerships. I mean, we serve, we serve our customer base is, the private sector. I mean, it's people, it's residents, it's businesses, and so, as we try to improve how we relate with our customers every day, it is trying to figure out how to improve that public-private partnership, and I think that goes for sustainability as well. I mean, even in the department's own operations, I mean, we spend, billions of dollars every year. The city of LA spends billions of dollars every year with the private sector on infrastructure, on goods and services, and that kind of partnership of understanding of our suppliers and our customers, understanding what the city's goals are and how we are trying to achieve that, I think helps to move us towards the goals in a way that reflects that kind of bringing, whether it's the private sector bringing the public sector along or the public sector bringing the private sector along. And I think if we look back on, as we look over, a generation or more of environmental improvement in the United States, a lot of that is driven by this sort of public-private partnership that goes about setting standards and technology forcing standards that drive innovation in the marketplace that has resulted in environmental improvements all across the country, and including here in Los Angeles. And so, as our federal government decides to change the meaning of what environmental is or protection is, probably not agency, people here remember what LA was like 25 years ago, and that the combination of regulation and goals and indicators with technology and changes in the market have really resulted in a much cleaner, healthier environment in Los Angeles.
I was going to kind of speak to not the public-private partnership, but I think the harder part of your question, since I had lots of time to think about it, which was, I think what you were asking was, how do we seek out those things that, rather than going for like a quick win or something that we can measure, something that provides much more long-term benefit, but maybe isn't as visible. And I think that gets to this issue of kind of environment and equity. a lot. I went to a previous panel, and there was a gentleman from the Netherlands who was there, and they were talking about resiliency and fire and floods and how you deal with that, since we've been staring that in the face so much now. And I asked him, well, in the Netherlands, they've been dealing with, a country being half underwater for, hundreds of years. How have you been able to deal with that? And he said, well, we've been doing really long-term planning, and it's not like the next 15 or 20 years, it's like the next 1,000 years. And that really gets to this idea of sustainability. And I think that probably most cities now are starting to think that way. It's very easy to do the quick fix, flashy sustainability program that might benefit a few people, or the really wealthy people are building these big green houses, but you're not really getting at the equity issues. But I think that discussion is really starting to happen now. The last time I was at the Urban Sustainability Directors Network meeting, everybody was talking about their climate plans and equity, and looking at, we're starting to see where we can't just be kind of marketing to the 1% and creating really expensive electric cars and fancy green buildings. We need to be really addressing the people that actually live in our communities, and how do we make their life better. So with us trying to tie our well-being index into our sustainability plan, we're looking at, it's harder to measure improving somebody's well-being, but we're asking people, how is your well-being and what's not working? And those issues are helping to guide our long-term decisions on sustainability as well.
Yeah, no, I think those are spot-on comments, because what I look at it is a reminder to myself as a practitioner that our mental frameworks and our perceptions that we bring to the job as CSOs need to evolve and change and be broad enough to look beyond the silos that may exist physically within the organizations, or the perception, as Nancy mentioned, that a public-private partnership is only something that's written on a piece of paper and a contract is set and everyone signs it and then we celebrate it in a news announcement. It's actually day-to-day of being in the street with your customers, servicing them, and that is, I think, a helpful reminder for me, and hopefully, a way that we can all continue on in making sure that we are, as practitioners, and probably, one of the handful of folks in our respective organizations who are thinking 10, 20, say nothing of 1,000 years, but at least we're thinking down the road, right? That's an important thing for us to try and implement in our day-to-day. So I promised some questions. If you have one back here.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, in the back.
So, Liz, you talked about the need to partner with industry.
Mm-hmm.
What are your insights, each of you, about how to be effective inside government from what's essentially a catalytic role in governments that are used to being organized by the workforce?
Well, I can jump at that first. That was my boss asking the question there. But the one thing that I've seen has been
That's a brilliant question.
yeah, that was a brilliant question, Rick. The one thing that I've seen that's been very effective since I've been the city of Santa Monica we've always had silos, and we still have silos as much as we try and break them down and have difficulty working across those silos. But the way we've been able to do it is finding those champions within their silos who really are interested and get sustainability. And it seems like more and more of those tend to be the younger people in the organizations. But I can guarantee you, if you go into the police department, the fire department, the planning department, the finance department, they've all got people who are really interested in some aspect of sustainability. And if you bring them together regularly, this is your green team, they tend to drive up, and they help change decisions within their silos and within the organization, and that seems to be has been an effective way for us to do it.
I think one other thing, because in addition to those, it's really, being able to talk about this in a way that it sort of captures the benefits for someone who this isn't their, day-to-day job, where they can see how an approach around sustainability makes their job easier, or they get better results, and really, thinking about what that business case is, because I think, across the silos, that is just every day a challenge, but I think, really trying to relate to the kinds of things that are measures of success if sustainability isn't in your title. So, if you're a power engineer, like, well, how are we going to deliver power better if we're concerned about sustainability? Well, we can do it cheaper. We get a pat on the head. I don't want that sound condescending, but get kudos from the policymakers. There's a whole bunch of measures, right, that relate to what people's jobs are every day, and I think it's important to try to capture those benefits and talk about them, because I think that the world of sustainability and sustainability officers is still a very narrow slice of many organizations, and that people, beyond the sustainability silo, embrace those values, but they do it in their own way, and we have to be able to talk about it that way.
Yeah, I think it's a hard thing. I think it is a really good question, because especially as we're thinking about sort of climate as a primary lens right now on some of the work we're doing, that's a really hard concept to communicate, especially to folks that aren't necessarily already in your sustainability place. But one place where it really worked was with water. So when we went through this drought, and there was outreach everywhere and information about how to save and where to conserve and what you can do at home and at work, and even in the city, you've got departments, whether it was LA Fire Department figuring out really creative ways when their training practices to use less water, or animal services using less water. It was something that everybody could relate to and everybody could find an action for. Whether or not you were the chief sustainability officer of that department, you were thinking about drought. And so I think it is like figuring out how do we relate these things to people in their daily lives, and communicate how it is something important to participate in.
Yeah, I'd add two others to that from my experience in Boston. One is collaborative, but taking sort of Nancy's premise even a step further, leading with understanding what the performance metrics of the other siloed departments are, and how your solution or initiative or program primarily addresses that. Oh, and by the way, it also accomplishes my sustainability. But I found it much more effective if I'm going to public works or transportation, potholes, picking up the trash, inspectional services for buildings. Here's an issue that I know you are challenged with and graded upon, that I can bring a solution that primarily benefits that, and by the way, it also helps on our sustainability agenda. The second one is more top-down, but tie it to the budget. If you're able to get the CFO to tie sustainability and climate and resilient metrics to both capital and operating funding, and forcing that conversation, and not necessarily as a go no go, but at least making it transparent, saying what does this do to the sustainability of your service, what does it do to the carbon footprint of what you're providing, Are you taking advantage of addressing vulnerability issues associated with climate change as you're investing in this building? You force that conversation, and we did that in Boston, made leapfrogs of improvement of getting agencies and departments that weren't paying attention before, because everybody pays attention to their budget process.
Excellent. Yeah, go, please. Please.
When I was at the White House, one of the things we didn't actually come up with this. It was actually the prior administration. Was the sort of the sustainability reporting was done by the Office of Management and Budget, and that scared the out of the agencies, but it also sort of gave that signal that come budget time, these indicators were really important, and we did the red, yellow, green, and boy, they hated getting red, and they hated hearing it from their budget analyst.
Yeah. Are there any last burning questions? Yeah, real quick.
One of the things I want to do is we provide some kind of scaffolding or framework for the cities to be able to accelerate their pathway to sustainability. So, any thoughts on what matters most in providing that foundation?
Well, if I may jump in, that's well aware of Gary's, efforts and progress, and I think one of the things that I have talked with him about and what we're working with currently on is developing this task force of sustainability officers, chief sustainability officers, practitioners, not necessarily chief sustainability officers, but practitioners who live and breathe sustainability daily, to come together at the county-wide level to try and help coalesce that exact question. So I don't have an answer, but I think there's a mechanism that is in play right now, and there's still some defining that needs to go on. But I'm optimistic about that approach and the outcome from that effort. Are there other things? Yeah.
I actually think we're all working on the same things kind of separately. And everybody's working on a climate action plan, an adaptation plan, stormwater and watershed management. We're trying to be water self-sufficient. And it's very difficult to do those things alone. But they all need to be done, and they all need to be regional or region-wide. Similarly, transportation and housing are huge regional issues that no city can address on their own. So, and we have institutions and organizations already that kind of try to bring people together to talk about those things, but they haven't been that effective. Maybe the way the county could do this is, relook at that. How can we become more effective at dealing with these regional issues together? Because, we're, as much as we like to collaborate, we're also in competition with all the cities that border us, particularly economically. We need to come up with some sort of structure or institution to help us break down those barriers so we can actually have really good discussions so that our bike share works from Santa Monica all the way to East LA, and our EV charging network is all interconnected, and we're not all doing things differently. So I don't know that I answered your question, but I'm kind of saying that we need to aspire to something better than what we have right now.
I also think that a lot of times these collaboration things are a coalition of the willing, and you have to find a way to bring along those who maybe are not unwilling or resistant, but just don't know. And so I'll give you an example from the federal government. We would give out these, we call them Green Gov Awards, and we had a whole series of them and gave them to agencies based on interesting things we did. And it turned out that the National Archives had done this incredible retrofit of all their HVAC systems and everything, because they were more their primary mission was to preserve records, and they were worried about how they were going to be able to preserve records, and they thought, well, we have to provide this stable environment. And it turned out that these energy efficient HVAC systems were help them achieve their mission much better because it saved them a bunch of money every year. They have to go to the Office of Management and Budget and ask for more money. And we gave them an award. And they were like, no one's ever asked us before. No, everybody always forgets about us. And they'd been doing all this really cool stuff on their own, but no one ever thought to include them in a discussion about sustainability. And so I think for the county in particular, besides good luck, that really, trying to assemble the willing and find ways to bring in the not the usual suspects.
The most important single, so I'd agree with that and sort of extend, the most important single recommendation I would have from our experience in Boston was in pulling together, and a lot of cities and towns do this for the planning side, but pulling together a C-suite level of public-private sector leaders. So not the sustainability officials, but the presidents of your universities, of your most significant real estate organizations, of your most significant economic drivers, the heads of the right agencies. So in Boston, it's both the mayor and the Secretary of Environment and Energy serve on this. So in Boston, it's the Green Ribbon Commission. That has been around now for 7 years and drives the agenda in Boston. And it makes it apolitical because it has now survived an administrative change with different mayors. These are C-suite folks who get together twice a year to talk about climate action and sustainability. And then there's an organization behind it and philanthropic support that does sort of the monthly meetings. But you have to plan for implementation when you're developing the strategy. And and everybody has to own it. This can't be LA County government's sustainability plan. This has to be LA County's sustainability plan to be successful.
So there you have it. I think we've checked the box on all things sustainable. We've covered all the bases, and now I'm sure you can all go out and practition away and make it happen. So, which is exactly why I wanted to wrap it up. Anyway, thank you all for joining us, and please thank the panel for the comments.